I think the beauty of that is that because innovation, great solution always comes from constraints,
Yeah,
limitation.
yeah,
Because otherwise, if you don't have constraint in your time, in your budget, there's no point to talk about innovation because it'll be timeless. It's keep
yeah.
happening, what do you mean? So you have to have some constraint, limitation. What's your design challenge, design brief? You have to clearly define. And then you could think about your functional requirement. And then that's the beauty of innovation. Otherwise, you become, it's pointless because times keep going. You don't need to grow. You just like stay in that stable stage.
Hi everyone, welcome to Designdrives, where we interview the most forward-thinking and innovative creatives on the planet to inspire and help you to reach your full creative potential. In the episode, I chat with Sheng-Hung Lee, who is a PhD researcher at MIT and also former designer at IDEO in Japan, who is now very active in service design. Sheng-Hung is holding multiple prestigious roles in international design organizations like IDSA or IDA. He's also a former engineer, and we actually talk a lot in the episode about the intersection of science, engineering, and design, and why you actually need constraints and friction in order to create a novel solution. Sheng-Hung is a person I highly respect as a strategic and deep thinker on design and innovation. So I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, cool. So I'm really looking forward. I'm here with Sheng-Hung Lee. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
We finally make it. We've been talking for a while to make this happen, so I'm really looking forward. Just to give people context about you, so you are a PhD researcher right now at MIT. We're going to learn a little bit about your research there, and you're also very involved in the IDSA, Industrial Designer Society of America, and specifically their committee for the IDEA Award and everything around that. So really looking forward to talk with you about service design. That is sort of an area you're very active right now, sort of design strategy and how that connects back to science. I think this was an interesting discussion we had. What happens if you really combine science and design and the positive impact that can happen from like intersecting these two areas. So I think it would be really cool, Sheng-Hung, if you could give a bit of a journey overview, a little bit about you have been doing a lot, right? We were just joking before the start of the episode, is like which out of your current roles and titles should we pick? But so I think it would be great for the audience if you give a bit of context about everything you've been doing so far.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to being here. I mean, virtually, but very happy to. I love Designdrive, the energy and the vibe. And for me, I was trained as industrial designer and electrical engineer when I was in college almost 12 years ago. It's crazy. And then after that, I'm very lucky to join Design Continuum based in Boston and Asia for a year, and then work for IDEO in Asia for around like 5 years. So a lot of like experiences and like a hardcore skill is learned from the industry. And after that, I just feel, that's too much. I need to back to school to recharge because I do believe that design is application science. So everything's applicable. It's like not just about theory, framework, also about put the ideas into practice, onto market, know the business, know the social impact. So that's why I'm very lucky to join MIT. So finish my double master in mechanical engineering and also like engineering management, the two master degrees. And now it's my first semester of PhD. Very exciting, very nervous, very exhausted at the same time. Focusing on like human behavior and service design.
Right. And yeah, I think this is interesting. I mean, like, of course, like what's interesting is that you have all of this background of the different cultures and environments you have been working in. And but let's talk a little bit more about your thesis you're doing right now, your PhD research, because I think that's kind of interesting for the people to hear how you can basically take your design background and now kind of use that for a PhD research study.
Yeah, so now I'm actually like kind of like design my own PhD program, and then I'm very lucky like MIT have this kind of platform mechanism to allow people to create their own to craft their own PhD program. So I'm very focused on like service innovation and human behavior, and my fundings mainly come from MIT Age Lab and MIT Ideation Lab. So we did a lot of like research about aging, about senior people. So my topics focus on financial planning services for aging population. So when we think about financial planning, we probably think about money, and it's very intuitive to think of money, finance, but actually financial planning is more than that. It's like you have to think about how to improve people's quality of lives, and how do you think about invest our next generation, and how do you make the money, the finance more sustainable and more like like as a system level to look at this. And I'm trying to understand, okay, want to look at this traditional financial industry area and how to use design to drive the conversation, to kind of think about every single touch point, service touch point, to make sure thing is benefit not just for financial advisor, service provider, also for service recipient, right? Like users, like senior people. So it's like very complex, but I'm very interesting, like look at this through the lens of service and system.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is the journey doesn't start. Age lab sounds like it's kind of focusing on when you're old, but actually, if you think about financial health, let's put it that way, it starts in way earlier, right? So it's kind of like your user journey, your service design is like the whole life, like
Yes.
80 years of your user journey, right? So the longest user
Yeah.
journey ever, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's like we people think about retirement. It's not about when you retire or you're going to retire, you think about your financial status. You have to
Yeah,
pre-plan ahead. So one of
exactly.
the challenges, like, how do you put this kind of concept or education to younger generation? Because if, for example, myself, like my parents, my family didn't give me a lot of chance to think about my financial status because they sponsored me, they helped me.
Right.
But I'm actually thinking about, wow, this is a serious issue, right? When you get old, when you retire, who's going to support you? And how do you make the money more sustainable? And that's the thing I'm interested and very curious to learn more.
What are the key challenges you see in that regard? What are some of the key challenges when it comes to designing that experience?
Yeah, so I did a couple like expert interview, and one of the story I want to share is like I interviewed one service designer in
Mhm,
Philips, and then she's like in her middle age, middle of career. She's a senior service designer at Philips,
mhm.
and she told me like, oh yeah, my dad has with a good relationship with his financial advisor for 30 years. So they're like a buddy. They're good friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They know each other, they trust each other.
yeah,
His financial advisor know every single his fortune or money, how to invest. But versus her, she told me like, oh, I financially we have separate bank account with her husband. At the same time, she has no idea where to find a financial advisor for herself, because there's a threshold, right? You have to above some amount of money to get a financial advisor. She couldn't
right.
find that. At the same time, she also don't want to chat with the robot, with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
AI.
yeah,
A lot of like people online, oh, do the calculation for me. These are the money, but she feel like the computer, the technology didn't understand her needs. So that's why she kind of a little bit lost. And then she self-taught herself about, okay, in that case, what are the resources she could get? How does she plan her fortune, her investment in the future? And I think that's really like a biggest pain point, because I'm thinking about myself. Okay, as an international student in the US, how can I going to plan this, right? Who's going to help me? I didn't have any exposure when I was in school.
right,
So these are the biggest pain point and learning I have.
right, right. So when you're thinking about the actual sort of like service design journey, right? So you think like some of the biggest challenges are in that early beginning phase, right? Like creating awareness for people and actually motivating them to deal with the topic and reduce stigmatization. Is that right?
Yeah, like people know like, oh, they want to start this as early as possible, but I think the biggest challenge is like they don't know who should ask for help or how to ask for help, right? So they start to look at the online forum, look at for people like, for example, when I interview with one leadership team at Capital One. So she's head of design or head of digital, I forgot. So it's more like, oh, she told me like, when I think about looking for a financial advisor or have that kind of mindset, is when she's going to do some critical purchasing in her life. For example, purchasing the car, purchase the house. And you know how she find the financial advisor is through her connection.
Right.
Oh, I work with Tony. Tony is a great advisor. Go for him. So there's no like a proper, there's no like a standard ways. Everyone's very different. So I'm just thinking about for the service design perspective, how can we design that invisible navigation system for people to know how to ask for help?
Right. And sort of navigating that journey, right?
Yeah, navigating the journey and kind of reduce the friction.
Yeah, it's really like it's a lifelong journey, and it's about education as well, right? It's not just about getting the help, but also learning about this. The same, with taxes, for example, right? I mean, like you can get a good tax advisor, and that helps. But if you know yourself about taxes, for example, it's very helpful as well, because you understand like better how to make like decisions, right? And like these are some of the things that, like I think an advisor is important, but at the same time it's also the education that you have yourself, right, to act autonomously and independent also, right?
Yeah.
um yeah, and I think what's kind of interesting, I mean, something you could maybe elaborate on is like, well, the problem you're trying to solve is very complex, right? I mean, um you're a designer by background, right? How you think, and I know you're very involved also. I mean, like, you can have a sort of mechanical engineering background, like you said, or an engineering background. How does that connect to that research? How do you see the role of design solving these complex problems that you are having there? And is that maybe a question you sometimes get asked? Maybe.
Yeah, I think for example, like MIT is famous for engineering, science, right? And
Right.
then maybe arts. And then for design, I think MIT has their own definition on design. It's very different,
Mhm.
very context driven. How do you give like temperature for technology, right? And then I think we talk a lot about like it's always become like cliche, like human centered design. For sure, everything we design is for human, right? The human centered, people centered. But what I mean by that is like we also talk a lot about empathy. And I think the difference between designers and engineers is like we all have our hardcore skill, but it's like the mindset, also the perspective. Can you really think in shoes of other people? Can you really like understand the user needs? Can you really listen? One of the example is like I want to share, I always share that in the class is like the first class I took at MIT is called Fundamental of System Engineering class.
Mhm.
And then it's about like 25 students, I guess. And the first question asked by professor is like he asking, okay, this is the moon rover. It's a vehicle on the moon, right? And then he showed us the photos on the uh, Google slides. And he asking, okay, so tell me, what are the things missing in these pictures, right? And I raised my hand. It's my first class. I'm very engaged in the class. Okay, I told him like I think it's missing it's honest feedback. And then suddenly, by the way, the all the classmates, the cohort, they are from NASA, from military, from like the soldier background. So
Right.
I raised my hand and say, "Oh, Professor, I think the moon rover missing it's honest feedback." And he paused, and the whole air like a freeze, right? And he said, "Oh my God, you are so soft." You're so soft because the answer he expected to have is like the moon rover missed like a
Right.
communication system, motion system. So you can see like different ways of thinking. What I think about that because you have to think from user perspective. You have to provide people feedback. What happened on the moon rover and how
Right.
to receive feedback. And I feel the way to deal with all these complex systematic, complicated challenges is definitely through people. And people is like we know the pain point, we can address the pain point. At the same time, we could have better picture about what's going on, what's the real problem we're going to solve.
Right. And it's kind of interesting because, of course, like you said, like it's the skill set, but it's also like the way of thinking. And it's kind of like a funny comment there from the professor, because I think you mentioned before, and also you're one of the few designers there, right? Or
Yeah.
like it's mostly engineers, right? How does that how does that environment of science engineer kind of maybe influences your design approach, and how could that environment benefit or lead to better or different outcomes for designers in general?
It's a great question. I think what I learned, because my background is like always like design with engineering, right? My
Mhm.
my bachelor degree is like industrial design with electrical engineering. My master's like business with mechanical engineering. So I think the power of this is like, yeah, we think about design, but design without business is art,
Right.
right? One thing, right? And then design without engineer is like you cannot scale. How do you scale the impact? For example, we're going to build like a satellite, right? It's a billions of dollars of like a prototype. How do you build that if you don't have like systematic way to think about the problems? So I think the beauty of design engineering is like it has to be connected, it has to be integrated, because when we talk about human centered design, we value people